The entire hall fell silent. Surrounded by laughter and crystal glasses, the billionaire Ethan turned to the young black waitress, Grace, and said with a mocking smile, "If you can play that piano, I'll marry you." In that moment, without knowing it, he was about to face the greatest lesson of his life. If you love powerful, heart-touching stories that make you feel and reflect, like this video and follow our channel for more. The laughter stopped as if cut by a blade. Crystal glasses froze midair, violins from the string quartet faltered, and dozens of eyes turned at once. A single sentence had shattered the elegance of the night. "If you can play that piano, I'll marry you." Ethan Cole, the billionaire host, leaned back in his leather chair, his smile sharp and cruel. He enjoyed the weight of his words, the way they turned a living soul into the evening's entertainment. Around him his guests laughed, not because it was funny, but because that was what power demanded. At the center of it all stood Grace Williams, a black waitress, young yet weathered by life, holding a silver tray that suddenly felt as heavy as the world itself. Her uniform was simple, her posture graceful but tired. For most of them, she had been invisible all night, gliding through the room like background music. But now, every gaze burned against her skin. The marble floor beneath her shoes seemed colder, harder. The chandeliers above, dazzling a moment ago, now felt like spotlights exposing her. In their eyes she was not Grace, not a woman, not a person, only a joke waiting to happen. Yet inside her chest, beneath the layers of silence and humiliation, something stirred. A memory. A fire. The echo of melodies that had once been her sanctuary. And for the first time that evening, Grace lifted her eyes from the ground. The Hall of Untouchables did not know it yet, but the game had just changed. Laughter didn't just fill the room, it crashed through it, shattering the elegance like glass against stone. It was sharp, merciless, and contagious, spreading from table to table until the entire hall was drowning in mockery. Some guests covered their mouths as they laughed, others leaned into their neighbors to whisper, their words dripping with disdain. Ethan Cole leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He didn't need applause. The laughter of the powerful was enough. He swirled the wine in his glass, smirking as if he had orchestrated the perfect punchline. Grace Williams stood at the center of it all. Her silver tray quivered in her hands, the champagne flutes trembling in rhythm with her pulse. She felt their eyes like daggers, slicing through her uniform, through her skin, through the fragile veil of invisibility she had worn all evening. She had been invisible by choice. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant they didn't see her, didn't aim their cruelty at her. But now, with one sentence, Ethan had dragged her into the spotlight. The whispers stung sharper than the laughter. Imagine her on a piano bench. A waitress? She probably can't even read music. She should be honored. He even looked at her. Each word was dipped in venom, in the centuries-old poison of prejudice. They weren't just laughing at her role. They were laughing at her existence, her place in their world, her very right to stand in that golden hall. Her throat tightened, her chest burned, but her face remained still. Grace had learned long ago how to survive in silence, how to smile faintly when insulted, how to bow her head and keep moving. But tonight, the cruelty cut deeper. Tonight, something inside her refused to bend. She thought of her grandmother's voice, trembling with both pride and sorrow, telling her, "Baby, they'll try to make you small. But don't ever forget, you were born with music in your blood." That memory rose like a shield. The laughter became distant, almost hollow, like the clatter of cheap glass. Ethan's grin blurred into the background. All she could feel was that fire, that defiance, that refusal to let them write her story. Slowly, she lowered the tray onto a side table. The clinking of the glasses was barely audible, but it echoed in the silence of her decision. Her hands no longer trembled. Her breath slowed. She straightened her back. For the first time that night, she lifted her chin and met the eyes of the room. Dozens of powerful men and women stared back, expecting entertainment, expecting a farce. The corners of her lips curved ever so slightly. Not a smile, but something stronger. A signal. The hall erupted in laughter again, convinced they had won. Convinced she was about to embarrass herself. But they had no idea that the very thing they believed would destroy her was about to set her free. The laughter lingered like smoke, heavy and suffocating, curling through every corner of the hall. But beneath it, another sound began to emerge. Silence. Not the silence of respect, but the tense, cruel kind. The kind that waits for failure. Grace stood still, her hands empty now, her tray abandoned on the side table. For a moment, the entire hall seemed suspended in time, watching to see whether she would shrink into herself or dare to step forward. Every instinct screamed at her to disappear, to bow her head, mutter an apology, and vanish into the shadows of the service corridor where the world couldn't see her. That was survival. That was what her years in the city had taught her. Don't make noise, don't draw attention, don't give them more reasons to laugh. But something inside her rebelled. A spark lit deep in her chest, the kind of flame born from generations who had endured being silenced. She thought of the piano keys she had touched as a child, when music was still a safe haven. She thought of her mother's tired hands, working 2 jobs so Grace could practice for lessons they couldn't really afford. She thought of the cruel voice of her first teacher who once said, "You don't look like you belong here." That same voice echoed in this hall now, multiplied by dozens of mocking stares. But with it came another, her grandmother's steady whisper, "Baby, don't let them decide your worth. You were born with a song the world can't erase." Her chest rose with a long breath. Her heartbeat slowed, every thud echoing like a drum. She realized the silence wasn't just pressing against her, it was waiting to be broken. And she was the only one who could break it. Grace's eyes lifted, steady and unflinching. The chandeliers that once blinded her now seemed to dim, leaving only the grand piano gleaming in the center of the hall. Its polished black surface reflected the room like a mirror, daring her to claim it. And then she moved. One step. Then another. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each sound louder than the last, slicing through the suffocating quiet. Conversations died. Glasses lowered. The laughter dissolved into murmurs of disbelief. Is she really? She can't be serious. But Grace didn't stop. Her walk was slow, deliberate, each step a refusal to be small. The air thickened with anticipation, the kind that makes a room forget to breathe. By the time she reached the piano, the hall was utterly still. Dozens of eyes followed her every move, waiting, some eager to see her fail, others frozen by the audacity of what was unfolding. Grace pulled out the bench, the wooden legs scraping softly against the marble. The sound pierced the silence like thunder. She sat down, her hands hovering above the keys, her eyes closing as if she were drawing strength from something no one else could see. And in that suspended heartbeat, the hall realized, this was no longer their game. Her fingers hovered above the ivory keys, trembling not with fear, but with the weight of everything pressing against her. The eyes of the wealthy, the sting of humiliation, the echo of her grandmother's voice. For a heartbeat, the hall seemed to lean forward, waiting for the spectacle of her failure. And then, she pressed a single key. A low note, soft but steady, floated into the air. It lingered like a question, daring the silence to swallow it whole. But the silence didn't win. Instead, the note stretched, filling the hall with something fragile yet unbreakable. Grace's hands moved again. Another key. Then, another. The melody began to rise, delicate at first, like a whisper in a storm. And then, with sudden force, her fingers cascaded across the piano, unleashing a sound that ripped through the suffocating air. It wasn't just music. It was memory, blood, history. Each note carried the laughter of children in church choirs, the sorrow of hands calloused by labor, the fire of voices that refused to be silenced. It was generations of pain transfigured into beauty, defiance wrapped in harmony. The room froze. Conversations died. Laughter vanished. The chandeliers themselves seemed to flicker in awe. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their smugness dissolving into something they hadn't expected to feel: shame. Others blinked back tears they couldn't explain. And Ethan Cole, the billionaire who had summoned this moment with cruelty, sat paralyzed. The grin on his face had melted away, replaced by something raw, something foreign to him: awe. Grace's body swayed with the rhythm, her eyes closed, her soul pouring through every movement of her hands. The music grew bolder, soaring, filling every corner of the hall until there was no space left for arrogance, no shadow left for prejudice. When she reached the crescendo, the sound thundered through the hall like a storm breaking over the ocean. And then, just as suddenly, she let it fall. A final cascade of notes landing gently, tenderly, like rain on parched earth. The last sound hung in the air, vibrating in the silence. And then there was nothing. Not a whisper. Not a breath. The hall, so loud with laughter only moments ago, now stood captive in reverence. Grace opened her eyes. She didn't look at Ethan. She didn't look at anyone. She simply lowered her hands, resting them in her lap, her face calm, as if the music had spoken all that needed to be said. For a long moment, no one dared to move. The final note still echoed in their chests, though the piano had fallen silent. It was as if the very walls of the mansion had swallowed the melody and were now holding their breath. The same men and women who had laughed with crystal in hand now sat frozen, faces pale beneath the golden glow of the chandeliers. Glasses trembled in fingers that once pointed at her. The shame in the room was palpable, thick, heavy, undeniable. One woman pressed her napkin to her lips, hiding the tears threatening to spill. A man cleared his throat, but no words came out. The whispers that had mocked Grace only minutes ago had died, strangled by the truth revealed in her music. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected her. The hall, so used to spectacles of wealth and arrogance, had just witnessed something it couldn't buy. Grace had laid bare a truth they could neither own nor diminish. Greatness comes not from status, but from the soul. And Ethan Cole, the architect of this humiliation, sat motionless. His wine glass, forgotten in his hand, tilted slightly, a drop sliding over his knuckles. His smug grin had vanished, replaced by something uncharacteristic, something almost human: wonder. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. The power he wielded so easily, the laughter he commanded at will, had been stripped away by the hands of a woman they all believed was invisible. The silence grew unbearable. Someone shifted in their chair, another let out a shaky breath. Yet no one spoke. They couldn't. Words would have been too small, too clumsy to contain what had just happened. Then, quietly, as if afraid to disturb the sacredness of the moment, one of the guests, Richard Evans, the oldest man in the room, known for his sharp tongue and colder heart, rose from his seat. All eyes followed him as he walked slowly toward the piano. His steps echoed in the hush, deliberate and steady. Grace didn't flinch. She didn't bow her head or shrink. She simply watched as Richard reached into the pocket of his suit jacket, pulled out a single rose, and laid it gently across the keys. The sound of the stem brushing against ivory was softer than a whisper, but it thundered through the room. It was the first act of respect that evening, and it changed everything. The hall had never known silence like this. Not during Ethan's grandest parties, not during the speeches of governors and senators who often filled these gilded walls. This silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was alive. It pulsed with the weight of shame, awe, and something that felt dangerously close to reverence. All eyes were on Richard Evans, the elder guest whose reputation was built on deals as sharp as his words. He had never been known for kindness. Yet there he was, standing before Grace, his hand resting for a brief moment on the polished lid of the grand piano. From his pocket, he drew a single rose, crimson, delicate, impossibly out of place in that marble room. He lowered it slowly, deliberately, until it touched the ivory keys where Grace's hands had worked their miracle. The petals brushed against the polished surface with a whisper that seemed to echo louder than thunder. No applause followed. No one dared to break the sanctity of the moment. But the air shifted. The mockery that had poisoned the hall only minutes ago was gone. In its place, a quiet recognition, raw and undeniable. They had witnessed greatness. Grace didn't move. She sat tall, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze steady but distant, as if she still heard the echo of her own music ringing in eternity. The rose lay before her like an unspoken apology, not just from Richard, but from everyone who had laughed, doubted, or dismissed her. For the first time that night, Ethan Cole felt something he could not name. His chest tightened, his pulse quickened. Admiration, yes, but something deeper too, something he had never allowed himself to feel for someone he thought beneath him. Grace had not only silenced the room, she had undone him. Around the hall, heads lowered, eyes softened. The same faces that had grinned with cruelty now carried the marks of humility. In the quiet glow of chandeliers, the rose burned like a small flame, a symbol of respect, of transformation, of truth too beautiful to be denied. Grace finally stood, her posture unshaken, her dignity intact. She did not reach for the rose. She didn't need to. The gesture belonged to them, not to her. Her music had already spoken louder than any flower could. The rose would remain on the piano long after the night ended, a reminder that even in rooms built on arrogance and wealth, truth could still find its voice. Ethan Cole had never been speechless in his life. Power was his native tongue, and arrogance his armor. But as he sat there, watching Grace rise from the piano bench with quiet dignity, something inside him cracked. His gaze followed her every movement, the steadiness of her shoulders, the calm defiance in her eyes, the way she carried herself as if she no longer belonged to their mockery. She was radiant, not because of wealth or status, but because she had revealed a truth so raw it made his fortune look like dust. The rose on the piano glowed under the chandelier light, crimson against ivory. Ethan's chest tightened as he realized he hadn't placed it there, and yet, a part of him wished he had. For the first time, he saw her. Not as a waitress in a black uniform, not as a convenient target for his cruelty, but as Grace, a woman who had turned his house of laughter into a cathedral of silence with nothing more than her hands and her courage. The hall remained frozen, every guest still caught in the spell she had woven. But Ethan felt something they did not. Something dangerous. A flicker of admiration that grew into longing. It unsettled him, rattling the foundations of the pride he had built his empire upon. He thought of all the women who had ever surrounded him, glittering, shallow, chosen for beauty or name. None of them had ever made him feel this way. None had ever silenced him with a single note. And as Grace returned to her corner, lifting her tray again with the same quiet grace, Ethan's heart did something it had never done in the presence of wealth or power. It stumbled. The billionaire who had everything suddenly realized he was in the presence of someone who needed nothing from him. And that truth, that freedom, made her untouchable, irresistible, unforgettable. The hall was still, but inside Ethan, a storm had begun. He tried to steady his hand on the stem of his wine glass, but it trembled. He told himself it was nothing, just surprise, just the shock of being outplayed in his own house. But deep down, he knew it was more. Grace had unsettled him in a way no rival, no deal, no scandal ever had. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't asked for attention. She had simply sat at that piano and revealed a greatness so undeniable it made him question everything he thought he understood about power. As she moved quietly among the tables once more, tray in hand, she did not seek his gaze. She did not need to. But Ethan's eyes followed her like a compass he couldn't control. He noticed what he had never seen before: the quiet strength in her posture, the kindness in the way she steadied a glass for an older woman, the patience in her smile as she continued her work as if the room hadn't just been turned upside down by her music. Admiration began to take root, but with it came something deeper, something Ethan had no language for. It wasn't desire born of possession, the way he usually looked at women. It was humbling. It was the ache of realizing that here, before him, stood someone he could never buy, never command, never reduce to a game. His chest tightened with a thought he had never allowed himself. What if she is greater than me? And Grace, though she did not look his way, felt the shift in the room. She felt the weight of eyes that no longer dismissed her, but she kept her dignity. She would not let their sudden reverence shake her, just as she had not let their cruelty break her. Inside her heart, she knew one truth: she had nothing to prove to them, and yet she had proven everything. For Ethan, that was the beginning of something dangerous and beautiful all at once. A seed planted in silence, admiration that could grow into respect, respect that could grow into love, love that might finally teach him the lesson he never sought but always needed. The night would be remembered, though not for its wealth, nor for its chandeliers, nor for the arrogance that had once filled the air. It would be remembered for a single moment of truth, when a woman the world tried to make invisible revealed a light too powerful to ignore. The rose still lay on the piano, crimson against the ivory, glowing like a flame that refused to die. Around it, the room had changed. The faces that once sneered were quiet now, softened by shame, stirred by admiration. They would leave that mansion and return to their gilded lives, but deep inside, a seed had been planted, the memory of Grace's music, a reminder that dignity cannot be mocked, and greatness cannot be bought. Ethan Cole sat in silence, staring at the piano as if it were a mirror reflecting everything he had never wanted to see. For the first time in his life, his billions felt small, fragile, meaningless in the presence of someone who had nothing, yet carried everything that mattered. And Grace? She walked away from the piano with the same quiet strength with which she had walked toward it. She did not seek applause, nor validation, nor the eyes that now followed her in awe. She simply returned to her place, to her work, because she had never played to prove herself to them. She had played to honor the truth inside her, and that was enough. But something lingered in the air between her and Ethan. A look, a spark, a recognition that the line between humiliation and reverence had been crossed, and in that crossing, something greater was born. Admiration, respect, the fragile beginning of change. The mansion slowly resumed its hum, conversations in hushed tones, glasses clinking again, the string quartet returning to their instruments. But the room was not the same. It never would be. And somewhere, in the silence of his heart, Ethan understood. He had tried to break her with a joke. Instead, she had broken him with the truth. Because in the end, the greatest lesson is this: true worth is never defined by the eyes of the powerful, but by the light that no one can extinguish.